I thought my parents hated me when they gave my sister a brand new apartment in the city, while I got stuck with a crumbling, rat-infested house in the middle of nowhere. My sister laughed in my face at the lawyer's office, called me the family failure, said I deserved nothing better than that rotting pile of wood and broken dreams. I cried myself to sleep that first night on a moldy mattress, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and the sound of mice scratching inside the walls. But 3 months later, everything changed when a man in an expensive suit knocked on my door and told me something that made my blood run cold. My name is Emma, and I'm 32 years old. For as long as I can remember, my older sister Claire has been the golden child in our family. She graduated top of her class, married a successful lawyer, always said the right things at family dinners, always knew how to make our parents smile. Me. I was the dreamer, the artist, the one who dropped out of college to pursue photography, the one who couldn't seem to get my life together according to my family's standards. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday gathering, I could feel the difference in how my parents looked at us. Claire got pride and admiration. I got concern and disappointment. When my father passed away last year after a sudden heart attack, I thought maybe, just maybe, things would change. I thought maybe he'd left me something that would show he believed in me. After all, my mother called both of us to the family lawyer's office on a gray Tuesday morning in October. I remember the rain hitting the windows of that sterile office, the smell of old leather and expensive wood, the way my sister's perfume filled the small room, something floral and expensive that probably cost more than my rent. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was an older man with silver hair and reading glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He cleared his throat, opened a manila folder, and started reading my father's will. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was it, the moment that would show me my father had seen something in me, had valued me, had loved me just as much as Claire. Claire got the apartment first. A beautiful 2-bedroom place in downtown Manhattan, fully paid off, worth at least $800,000, according to Mr. Henderson's careful pronunciation of the numbers. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, a doorman, a gym in the building, parking included. My sister smiled, that perfect practice smile she'd been using since high school, and squeezed her husband's hand. She didn't even look surprised. She expected it. Then came my turn. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and said, quote, to my daughter Emma, I leave the property located at 473 Old Mill Road, including the house and all structures thereon, end quote. My stomach dropped. I knew that address. That was the old house, the one my father had inherited from his uncle decades ago, the one nobody had lived in for at least 15 years. The one we used to drive past when I was a kid, and my father would shake his head and call it a money pit, a disaster, a burden he didn't know what to do with. Claire actually laughed out loud, not a polite chuckle, but a real, genuine laugh that echoed off the office walls. Oh, Emma, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, I guess Dad really knew what you could handle. A fixer-upper for a fixer-upper. Her husband tried to hide his smirk behind his hand. Even my mother looked away, embarrassed but not disagreeing. I felt something break inside me that day. Not just my heart, but something deeper, some fundamental belief that despite everything, my parents had loved me equally. The lawyer continued talking about paperwork and signatures required, but I couldn't hear him anymore. There was just this ringing in my ears, this crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I signed whatever papers he put in front of me, took the keys that felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds, and walked out into the rain without an umbrella. I didn't go see the house for 2 weeks. I couldn't bring myself to face it, to see the physical manifestation of my father's disappointment in me. But my lease was up at my tiny studio apartment, and I couldn't afford to renew it. My photography business was barely surviving, certainly not enough to compete with Manhattan rent prices. So on a cold Saturday morning in November, I loaded everything I owned into my beat-up Honda Civic and drove 2 hours north to Old Mill Road. The house was worse than I remembered. So much worse. It sat at the end of a long, overgrown driveway, surrounded by wild grass that came up to my knees and trees that hadn't been trimmed in years. The paint, which might have been white once, was now a sickly gray color, peeling off in long strips that curled away from the wooden boards underneath. Several windows were cracked. One was completely broken, covered with a piece of plywood that had warped with age and weather. The front porch sagged in the middle like a broken spine, and I was genuinely afraid it would collapse if I put my full weight on it. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, just staring at it, tears streaming down my face. This was my inheritance. This was what my father thought I was worth. A house that should probably be condemned, that would cost a fortune to repair, that nobody in their right mind would want. Claire got a palace in the sky, and I got a tomb, but I had nowhere else to go. So I wiped my tears, grabbed my suitcase, and carefully made my way up those dangerous porch steps. The key stuck in the lock, and I had to jiggle it for a full minute before the door finally creaked open. The smell hit me first, musty and damp, like old books left in a basement for decades. Then I saw the interior, and I actually gasped out loud. Furniture covered in stained white sheets sat like ghosts in the dim light filtering through dirty windows. The wallpaper was peeling everywhere, revealing water stains underneath that looked like strange, abstract art. The wooden floor was warped in places, and I could see actual holes where the boards had rotted through. In the kitchen, which was straight out of 1970, the cabinets hung at odd angles, and there was a suspicious dark stain on the ceiling that suggested serious roof problems. I found one bedroom upstairs that seemed slightly less destroyed than the others. The mattress was old and smelled terrible, but I put my sleeping bag on top of it and tried to convince myself this was temporary, that I'd figure something out, that this wasn't going to be my life. That first night, I lay awake listening to sounds I couldn't identify, creaks and groans and scratching that might have been mice or squirrels or something worse. I called Claire, desperate for some connection to family, some reassurance that I wasn't completely alone. She answered on the fourth ring, and I could hear music and laughter in the background. She was at some party, of course, probably showing off her new apartment to friends. "Emma, what do you want?" she said, impatient and annoyed. "I'm kind of busy. I just wanted to talk," I said, my voice cracking. "This house it's really bad, Claire. I don't know what to do." She sighed, that long-suffering sigh she'd perfected over the years. "Emma, you need to grow up. Not everything is going to be handed to you on a silver platter. Dad gave you that house because he thought maybe the challenge would finally make you responsible. Maybe if you actually worked on something instead of chasing your silly photography dreams, you'd become a real adult. Now I have to go. My guests are waiting." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there in the dark, holding my phone, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my entire life. That night, I did cry myself to sleep on that disgusting mattress, surrounded by the sound of this house falling apart around me, wondering how my life had gone so completely wrong. The next few weeks were brutal. I had to get the electricity turned on, which required paying a huge deposit because the account had been closed for so long. The water worked, but it came out brown for the first 10 minutes every time I turned on a tap, and it smelled like rust and something else I didn't want to identify. The heating system was broken, and it was getting colder every day. I wore 3 layers of clothes inside the house and could see my breath in the air when I woke up each morning. I started documenting everything with my camera, partly for insurance purposes in case. I decided to just burn the whole place down for the money, mostly because that's what I do when I don't know how to process my emotions. I photographed the water stains that looked like continents on the ceiling, the way light came through the cracked windows in strange angular patterns, the contrast between the beauty of the autumn trees outside and the decay of everything inside. My mother called once during this time. She asked how I was settling in, her voice careful and distant. "Fine," I lied, because what else was I supposed to say? There was a long pause, and then she said something that made my chest tight. "Your father thought this would be good for you, Emma. He said you needed something to invest in, something real instead of those pictures you take. He thought maybe this house would give you purpose. So it was intentional. The cruelty wasn't accidental or thoughtless. It was calculated. My father had genuinely believed that giving me this disaster would somehow fix me, make me into the daughter he'd wanted instead of the one he got. I thanked my mother for calling and hung up before she could hear me cry again. I started making a list of everything that needed to be fixed. The roof, obviously, with those water stains and the suspicious soft spots. The foundation had cracks I could fit my fingers into. Every window needed replacing. The electrical system was probably a fire hazard. The plumbing made sounds like a dying animal. The list grew longer every day, and my bank account grew smaller. I'd have to spend every penny I had saved just to make this place livable. And even then it would be worth maybe $100,000 if I was lucky. I couldn't even sell it for enough to buy a decent apartment in the city. Claire posted photos of her new place on social media. Hardwood floors gleaming in natural light, a kitchen with marble countertops and stainless steel appliances. Her and her husband toasting with champagne in front of those floor-to-ceiling windows with the Manhattan skyline behind them. "Thanks, Dad." She captioned one photo with a heart emoji. Every post felt like a knife in my chest. Then, on a Wednesday morning in early December, everything changed. I was in the kitchen trying to figure out if the oven worked or if it would explode and kill me when I heard a car coming up the driveway. This was strange because I hadn't seen another vehicle on this road in the 3 weeks I'd been here. The house was isolated, surrounded by empty land and forest. No neighbors for at least a mile in any direction. I looked out the window and saw a black Mercedes sedan, the kind that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. A man got out, middle-aged, wearing an expensive-looking suit that seemed completely out of place in this setting of decay and wilderness. He walked up to the porch with a confidence that suggested he'd been here before and knocked on the door with a firm, business-like rhythm. My heart started racing. Had I done something wrong? Was I in trouble? Was someone going to tell me I couldn't even have this terrible house? I opened the door slowly, keeping the chain lock on. "Emma Hartley," he said. "It wasn't a question. I'm David Morrison, attorney at law. I represent Morrison Development Corporation, and I need to speak with you about this property. It's extremely urgent." I let him in because I didn't know what else to do. He looked around the interior with sharp, assessing eyes, taking in all the damage, all the decay, but he didn't seem disgusted or surprised. He seemed interested, very interested. We sat at the old kitchen table, which wobbled on the uneven floor, and he pulled out a leather folder from his briefcase. "Miss Hartley," he began, "do you know the history of this land?" I shook my head. My father inherited it from his uncle. Nobody lived here for years. That's all I know. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected this answer. "Do you know the boundaries of your property? How much land you actually own?" Again, I shook my head. I assumed it was just the house and maybe the yard. An acre or two at most. He pulled out a survey map and spread it across the table. "Miss Hartley, according to county records and the deed that was transferred to you, you don't own an acre or two. You own 473 acres of land. This house sits on a property that stretches from Old Mill Road all the way to the river, including the entire Western Forest Preserve and the land currently occupied by the Riverside Shopping Complex." I stared at him, not understanding. "What are you talking about?" He pointed to the map, his finger tracing boundaries that seemed impossibly large. "Your great-uncle purchased this land in 1958 for almost nothing because it was considered worthless at the time. Too far from the city, too difficult to develop. But he was smart, very smart, and he had a vision for the future. He bought everything he could afford, which happened to be a massive tract of land. When he died, it passed to your father, and when your father died, it passed to you." My hands started shaking. I looked at the map, at the thick red line showing property boundaries that encompassed what looked like half the county. This doesn't make sense. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't my father say anything? Mr. Morrison leaned back in his chair. "That's a very good question, Miss Hartley. I've been trying to purchase this land for 6 years. I approached your father multiple times with very generous offers. The shopping complex I mentioned, the one on your land, they built it assuming they had permission because someone in the county office made an error in the records. That building is illegal. They owe you 6 years of rent, plus penalties. We're talking about millions of dollars, Miss Hartley, possibly tens of millions. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. You're lying. This is some kind of scam. That can't be true. He pulled out more papers, official-looking documents with county seals and legal stamps. I assure you it's completely true. I have a title search here, going back 80 years, clearly showing the chain of ownership. I have the original deed your great-uncle filed. I have correspondence between my office and your father's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, spanning years. Your father knew exactly what this property was worth. He knew what he was giving you. Something cold settled in my stomach. If my father knew, if he'd known all along that this land was worth millions, why had he let me believe it was worthless? Why had he let Claire laugh at me in that lawyer's office? Why had Mr. Henderson said nothing about the true value? I looked up at Mr. Morrison with tears in my eyes. Why are you telling me this? What do you want? He smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of a shark. I want to buy your land, Miss Hartley. My company wants to develop a major residential and commercial project here. We're prepared to offer you $22 million for the entire property. You could walk away from this disaster of a house, never worry about money again, live anywhere you want, do anything you want. All you have to do is sign. He pushed a contract across the table toward me. I looked at it, at the numbers that seemed impossibly large, at the signature line waiting for my name. $22 million. More money than I could possibly imagine. I could buy 10 apartments like Claire's. I could travel the world. I could fund my photography dreams forever. All I had to do was sign. But something stopped me, some instinct, some voice in the back of my head that sounded like my father's voice, saying, "Don't be stupid. Emma, think. I need time," I said, pushing the contract back toward him. "I need to think about this. I need to talk to my own lawyer." His smile disappeared instantly. "Miss Hartley, this offer expires in 48 hours. The development timeline is very tight, and we have investors waiting. If you don't sign now, the offer will be withdrawn, and you'll have to deal with the shopping complex lawsuit on your own, which could take years and cost you a fortune in legal fees." "Then I'll deal with it," I heard myself say, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "Please leave." He stood up, anger flashing across his face for just a moment before he controlled it. "You're making a mistake, Miss Hartley. A very big mistake." He gathered his papers, put them back in his briefcase, and walked to the door. 48 hours. After that, you're on your own. The Mercedes drove away, leaving me alone in this broken house with a map showing boundaries I couldn't quite believe and a head full of questions that felt like they might explode. I immediately called Mr. Henderson, my father's lawyer, the one who'd read the will. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice when I told him about Mr. Morrison's visit. "Did you know," I asked him, my voice shaking with anger now instead of sadness, "did you know about the land value when you read my father's will?" There was a long silence. "Miss Hartley," he finally said, "I was instructed by your father to read the will exactly as written, with no additional commentary or explanation. Those were his explicit instructions." "That's not an answer," I said. "Did you know?" Another pause. "Yes, I knew." I hung up on him. I felt betrayed in a way I couldn't even articulate. Every adult in my life had lied to me, had let me think I was worthless, had watched me suffer in this terrible house while knowing the truth. I called Claire next, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. She answered with that same annoyed tone. "Emma, I really don't have time for another one of your crisis calls." "Did you know?" I said. "About the land, about what it's worth. Did you know?" "What are you talking about?" Her voice changed, became very cautious. "My property, Claire, the one Dad left me, it's worth millions. Millions. And I think you knew. I think everyone knew except me." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said in a voice so cold it made my skin crawl, "You always were the dramatic one, Emma. making up stories, imagining conspiracies. That house is worthless, and you know it. Just accept your lot in life and stop bothering me with your delusions. She hung up, but I'd heard something in her voice, something that confirmed what I was starting to suspect. She had known. Maybe not the exact numbers, but she'd known there was value there. And she'd said nothing. She'd laughed in my face while knowing the truth. I spent the next 48 hours doing research. I went to the county recorder's office and pulled every document related to my property. I hired my own lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chen, who came highly recommended and charged $300 an hour that I couldn't afford but paid anyway. I called a real estate appraiser and a surveyor, and slowly, piece by piece, the full picture emerged. My great uncle had been brilliant, maybe even a genius. He'd seen the future when nobody else had, bought land everyone else thought was worthless, and held on to it until his death. My father had inherited it, had watched the city slowly expand toward it year after year, had received multiple offers to sell, and had refused them all. He'd known exactly what he was sitting on, a fortune waiting to happen. But here's what I didn't understand. If he knew it was so valuable, why give it to me? Why not sell it himself and split the money between me and Claire? Why let me think it was a punishment, a burden? A sign of his disappointment. Patricia Chen figured it out. She's the one who found the key document, a letter my father had written to Mr. Henderson 3 years before his death. Mr. Henderson was legally required to turn it over once I'd hired my own attorney. And when Patricia read it to me over the phone, I had to sit down on the floor because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. The letter said, to my daughter Emma, "If you're reading this, it means you've discovered the truth about the land. I gave it to you, not to Claire, because I always knew you were stronger than your sister, even if you didn't believe it yourself. Claire needs easy things, clear paths, guaranteed success. But you, Emma, you have something she'll never have. You have the strength to turn disaster into triumph. I couldn't just hand you money. That would have destroyed you the same way I watched it destroy others. But I could give you an opportunity disguised as a burden and trust that you'd be smart enough and strong enough to figure it out. I'm sorry for the pain this has caused. I'm sorry your mother and I made you feel less than, but I needed you to stand on your own, to fight for yourself, to discover your own worth. The house is terrible, I know, but the land beneath it is your future. Choose wisely. Love, Dad." I cried for 3 hours straight after hearing that letter. Every emotion I'd been holding back came flooding out at once. Anger that he'd put me through this. Relief that he hadn't actually thought I was worthless. Grief that he was gone and I couldn't thank him or yell at him or hug him. Confusion about whether this was love or cruelty or some complicated mixture of both. But one thing became crystal clear. I wasn't selling to Mr. Morrison or anyone else. Not yet. Not until I understood exactly what I had and what it could become. The shopping complex lawsuit turned out to be the key to everything. Patricia Chen filed papers on my behalf, and suddenly I owned a massive commercial property that had been generating revenue for 6 years without paying me a penny. The shopping complex had 12 tenants. Everything from a grocery store to a coffee shop to a gym. Each one owed me back rent. The total came to just over $4 million, plus interest, plus penalties for illegal occupation of my land. Mr. Morrison called me 6 times a day for a week. His offers went up from $22 million to $25 million to $30 million. Each time I said no. His voice got a little more desperate, a little more angry. Other developers started calling too. Word had gotten out that this massive tract of land was suddenly available. Numbers got thrown around that made my head spin. 40 million, 50 million. One company offered $65 million for the entire property. Claire found out, of course. Money has a way of making news travel fast. She showed up at the house unannounced on a Saturday morning, driving a new car I'd seen her post about on social media, wearing clothes that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. She walked into my terrible house with her nose wrinkled in disgust and didn't even say hello before she started talking. "You can't keep this all for yourself," she said. "It's not fair. Dad was our father, not just yours. That land should be split between us. I deserve half of whatever you sell it for. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt sorry for her. Sorry that she'd never had to fight for anything, never had to discover her own strength, never had to learn that value isn't measured in Manhattan apartments and designer clothes. Did you know? I asked her quietly. When you laughed at me in the lawyer's office, did you already know this land was valuable? She shifted uncomfortably, not quite meeting my eyes. Mom might have mentioned something about Dad getting offers, but I didn't know the exact amounts or anything. But you knew enough. You knew this wasn't just some worthless dump. And you laughed at me anyway. Her face hardened. You always played the victim, Emma. Always so sensitive, always so hurt by everything. Yes, I laughed, because you've spent your whole life failing at everything you touch. And watching you get stuck with a disaster house was poetic justice. But now that it turns out to be valuable, you need to do the right thing and share it with family. I smiled, and I could feel that it wasn't a nice smile. The right thing, Claire. Like how you did the right thing and told me the truth. Like how Mom and Dad did the right thing and explained what this property really was. You want to talk to me about family and fairness after everything you've done? She stepped closer, her voice getting sharp and mean. I'll sue you. I'll take you to court and tie this up for years. You won't see a penny while lawyers drain all the value out of that land. Go ahead, I said. Patricia Chen thinks we'll win easily. Dad's will is clear and legal, and there's a letter explaining his intentions. You got your apartment, Claire. I got my land. That's what Dad wanted, and that's what's going to happen. She stood there for a long moment, her face red with anger, and then she said something I'll never forget. This is why Dad liked me better. Because I'm not selfish like you. She left, and I haven't spoken to her since. She did try to sue me, exactly like she threatened. The case was thrown out in less than 3 months. Patricia Chen was right. Dad's will was airtight, and the letter made his intentions crystal clear. Claire got stuck with about $50,000 in legal bills and an apartment that suddenly seemed a lot less impressive compared to what I had. But here's the thing, I still didn't sell. Everyone told me I was crazy. Patricia Chen said I should take one of the massive offers and invest the money wisely. My mother called finally, after months of silence, and told me I was being stupid and stubborn, that I should sell and split something with Claire to keep the family together. Friends I hadn't heard from in years came out of nowhere, suddenly wanting to reconnect, all of them saying the same thing. Sell, Emma. Take the money and run. But I kept thinking about that letter from my father, about choosing wisely, about turning disaster into triumph. I looked at that terrible house, at the land surrounding it, at the forest and the river and the space, so much space, and I started to see something different than everyone else was seeing. I started to see possibility. I hired an architect, a young woman named Sophia who specialized in sustainable development and had a vision that matched mine. We walked the entire property together, all 473 acres, and we talked about what it could be. Not what developers wanted it to be, not the highest profit use, but what it should be. What would make it special? What would honor my father's faith in me? We designed a community, not a commercial development or a housing tract or a shopping center, a real community. 20% of the land would stay forever wild, preserved forest with hiking trails and wildlife habitat. Another 20% would become an artist's colony, affordable live workspaces for photographers and painters and writers and musicians, all the dreamers like me who'd been told their whole lives they needed to be more practical. The shopping complex would stay, but under new management, with strict requirements that at least half the businesses be locally owned and that they pay fair wages. The rest would be housing, but not the kind that usually gets built. Mixed income, mixed use, sustainable, beautiful. Some would be sold, some would be rented affordably, some would be reserved for seniors and veterans. There would be community gardens and a farmer's market and a performance space and a medical clinic. We'd call it Hartley Commons. And it would be the kind of place where artists and families and retirees could all live together, where you didn't have to be rich to have a good life, where community mattered more than profit. People thought I was insane. Mr. Morrison called it financial suicide. Claire posted on social media about how I was wasting our father's legacy. Even my mother said I was throwing away the opportunity of a lifetime. The offers kept coming, kept getting bigger, and I kept saying no. But I found investors who believed in the vision. Impact investors who cared about more than just the bottom line. Grants from foundations that supported sustainable development and affordable housing. Loans from banks that specialized in community projects. It took 2 years of planning, endless meetings, more paperwork than I'd ever imagined existed. Nights where I was so stressed I couldn't sleep in days, where I was sure the whole thing would collapse. The construction started last spring. We renovated the terrible house first, turned it into the community center and my photography studio. We kept the bones of it, honored its history, but made it beautiful and functional. The water stains became art. The broken windows became a metaphor for transformation. Every nail I hammered felt like proof that my father had been right about me. The artist's colony opened 6 months ago. 40 live workspaces filled up in less than a week, with a waiting list of over 300 people. The community housing development started accepting residents in August. The shopping complex got rebranded and reimagined, with a focus on local businesses and community needs instead of corporate chains. The forest preserve opened to the public last month. 5 miles of trails through old growth trees that have been there longer than my family, longer than this country. Witnesses to everything that's happened here. Claire doesn't speak to me at all anymore. My mother calls occasionally, still doesn't really understand what I've built, but admits it looks nice in the photos. Some of my old friends have come to visit, and I can see the surprise in their eyes when they see what I've created. The failure, the family disappointment, the girl who got the disaster house built something that matters. Last week, a young woman knocked on my door at the community center. She was maybe 25, nervous, holding a portfolio. She said she'd heard about the artist's colony, that she was a sculptor working 3 jobs to pay rent in the city, barely able to afford materials, let alone studio space. She asked if there were any openings, her voice shaking like she was sure I'd say no. I looked at her, at the hope and fear mixed together on her face, and I saw myself 3 years ago, broken and crying in a terrible house, thinking my life was over. I smiled and said, "Let me show you the space we just finished. It has north-facing light and high ceilings, perfect for sculpture. And I think you're gonna love it here." Her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe it was real, that someone was giving her a chance. That art and life didn't have to be at war with each other. I gave her an application and told her I'd make a decision by the end of the week. But I already knew she was getting that space because someone had given me a chance once, disguised as a disaster, hidden in a terrible house at the end of a long driveway. Sometimes I walk the property at sunset, watching the light change over the forest, listening to sounds of people living and working and creating. And I think about my father. I think about that letter, about the faith it took to give me something that looked like nothing, to trust that I'd figure it out, to believe I was strong enough to turn burden into blessing. I think about Claire in her Manhattan apartment, alone with her husband and her nice things and her bitterness. I think about how she'll never understand that the real inheritance wasn't the land or the money or the property value. It was the chance to discover who I could be when everything fell apart. It was learning that disaster and opportunity can wear the same face. It was finding out that sometimes the people who love us most give us the hardest gifts because they know we're strong enough to transform them into something beautiful. The house isn't dilapidated anymore. The windows are fixed, the roof is new, the foundation is solid. But I kept one room exactly as it was the day I moved in, wallpaper peeling, floor warped, a reminder of where I started. Sometimes I take people in there and tell them the story. About the wool reading, about Claire's laughter, about the terrible first night on that moldy mattress, about Mr. Morrison and his briefcase full of offers I refused. They always ask the same question. Do you ever regret not taking the money and walking away? I look out at Hartley Commons. At the life and community we've built on land everyone said was worthless until it suddenly wasn't. I think about the artists creating work they couldn't have afforded to make anywhere else. The families living in beautiful homes they can actually afford. The forest being preserved instead of bulldozed. The local businesses thriving instead of being pushed out by corporate chains. I think about my photography studio, the work I'm finally able to do now that I'm not spending every minute just trying to survive. And I smile and say, not for a single second. My father gave me exactly what I needed, even though it looked like the worst thing that ever happened to me. He knew I didn't need easy. I needed possible. And that terrible, dilapidated house on land nobody wanted gave me that. It gave me everything. They always ask the same question. Do you ever regret not taking the money and walking away? I look out at Hartley Commons. At the life and community we've built on land everyone said was worthless until it suddenly wasn't. I think about the artists creating work they couldn't have afforded to make anywhere else. The families living in beautiful homes they can actually afford. The forest being preserved instead of bulldozed. The local businesses thriving instead of being pushed out by corporate chains. I think about my photography studio, the work I'm finally able to do now that I'm not spending every minute just trying to survive. And I smile and say, not for a single second. My father gave me exactly what I needed, even though it looked like the worst thing that ever happened to me. He knew I didn't need easy. I needed possible. And that terrible, dilapidated house on land nobody wanted gave me that. It gave me everything. So if you're going through something right now that feels like a disaster, that feels like the universe hates you, that feels like you got the worst deal while everyone else got the best, I want you to remember my story. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing in disguise. Sometimes the people who seem to get everything handed to them on a silver platter end up with nothing that matters. And sometimes that broken, terrible, falling apart disaster is exactly what you need to become who you were always meant to be. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think differently about your own struggles, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and leave a comment below telling me about a time something that seemed terrible turned out to be a blessing. And please subscribe to this channel because I share real stories about real people overcoming impossible situations. And your support helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'll see you in the next one.